Hinayana. Hinayana. Yana means vehicle or path. Hin means lesser, just like Mahayana, the greater vehicle. A prescribed path must be followed to attain either of the states of Nirvana described above. Either of the states of Nirvana. What are the two states of Nirvana?
No suffering or enlightenment.
Hmm?
No suffering or enlightenment.
Yeah, Nirvana just for oneself and enlightenment. The true path is described, a prescribed path must be followed to attain either of the states of Nirvana described above. The true path, the fourth of the Noble Truths. So this is the prescribed path, right? So what is the true path?
The path that leads to the cessation of suffering.
Yeah, but be more specific. Which one?
The cause that...
Roughly speaking, practice of morality, concentration, wisdom is eightfold path. Then on a higher level, the 5 paths are there. The path of, path of accumulation, path of preparation, path of seeing, path of meditation, path of no more learning. But when we Hinayana and Mahayana represent two schools of thought by which we discern this path. Hinayanists, the followers of the lesser way, basically seek to attain Nirvana for the individual's own sake. We should put a word only for the individual's sake, for the individual's own sake. According to this school, the mind should be trained to exercise a strong will in order to renounce samsara. It should pursue religious ethics and simultaneously practice concentration, samadhi, and special insight, as I mentioned, so that delusion and the seeds of delusions may be purged and may not grow again. So out of these three, the Shila, Samadhi, and Vipassana, in other words, morality or ethics, concentration and wisdom or insight. Morality is like the ground. Without the ground, you can't construct a house, you can't walk, nothing can stay. So morality, in Hindi it's called Shil. Shil. Shil comes from the word Shitalta, which means coolness. So when you observe moral ethics, your mind will remain cool, right? Does that make sense? When your mind remains cool, then you can concentrate. Then you can analyze. That's the meaning, really. For example, if you are very angry and your mind is disturbed and very hot, how can you meditate? How can you analyze? Because your mind is agitated. So therefore it is important. The observance of ethics and morality is extremely, extremely important. If you are a monk, you have like 250 something vows to observe. If you are even a novice monk, has 36 vows or something like that. So in the case of lay person also, you can take the Upasaka vow for the life, or one day Upasaka vow, things like that, or even if you don't do any of these things, but still there are rules to be followed, you don't kill, don't lie, things like that. Don't fight, right? So, my teacher used to say, Morality is like your whole body. For example, if a person has to cut a tree, first of all, his overall health should be good. So morality is like the overall health. Now, even if the overall health is good, but the arm which picks up the axe, if that arm is diseased and thin, no strength left, then again you can't cut the tree. So second, the arm must be strong, steady. So that is like concentration, because if your arm is strong and steady, then you will hit the axe at the right spot again and again. And I did a lot of chopping of wood earlier, when I was younger. So I know, because if your arm is not steady, you'll sometimes hit up, sometimes hit down, it takes a long, long time to cut it. So the arm must be concentration. But your overall health may be good, your arm may be strong, but if the axe which is to be used directly against the wood or tree, if that axe is blunt, it doesn't matter you are very healthy, arms very strong, you strike as much as possible, it will take long, long time to cut it. You may not even be able to cut it, right? So the axe must be sharp, because it's the axe which directly cuts the tree, right? So therefore, it is the wisdom that analyzes and that sees the reality. So wisdom is like that sharp axe which actually cuts ignorance, which is like the tree, right? And then what about concentration? I already explained morality. What about concentration? Concentration is a source of success both in war and in peace, or any human activity. If you don't concentrate, you will not be able to see the details of anything. You will not also be able to enjoy. When you enjoy something, in fact, for example, if you watch a very gripping movie, and then for 3 hours you will be like, हम लोग हिंदी में बोलते हैं ना, मुंह लटका के, मुंह like this, watching, right? Concentrate. If you concentrate, then you are able to see the reality, then you will enjoy. If you remain distracted, you will not be able to concentrate. Concentration is very, very important. It's like, as I always mention, concentration is like the laser beam. When the rays of the light of the laser beam are scattered, they don't have the power to cut through steel. But if the rays of the light of the laser beam are concentrated, it can easily cut through steel. Similarly, you have seen the farmers bringing water into their field, If the water goes into a properly done drainage, then you can use forceful water in any direction you want. But if they are scattered all over, right, you will not be able to channel the water where it is most needed. It's very important, concentration. But as I mentioned, your morality may be good, your concentration may be good. With the help of morality and concentration, you may be able to reduce manifestation of negative emotions a little bit. As is said in the text, your practice of compassion, your practice of loving kindness, your practice of patience, they will all help reduce the manifestation of negative emotions, but they don't have the power to cut the root of negative emotions. So what cuts the root of negative emotions is wisdom. They act like wisdom. And wisdom is always compared to bottle lamp, light. As soon as there is light, the darkness goes. Right? Right? So light, wisdom. And wisdom is even more important than concentration. And the very purpose of concentration is so that you are able to use your wisdom in a concentrated way. So concentration and wisdom, they support each other. Sometimes on a higher level we call it shamatha and vipassana. They support each other. Concentration helps analytical meditation. Analytical meditation helps concentration. Right? Concentration is like in a mathematical calculation, if you have like several numbers to be counted, 20, 30, 50, 60, you count, and then finally you have, okay, $500, right? There were many numbers, but you counted it, and then the sum total is $500, and then $500, just concentrate on that. Not the details of, I have $500. Concentrate, right? So wisdom is analyzing the details, analyzing the pros and cons. What if I do this? What if I don't do this? What if I go there? What if I don't go there? So it's in your daily life, regular life, you should always caution, pause and caution. Whatever you are doing, right? Whatever you're doing, don't just go because everybody is going in particular direction, as I mentioned yesterday.
So here, wisdom does not mean perfect wisdom.
Not necessary. Perfect wisdom, in order to get perfect wisdom, you need to train yourself, sharpen your axe, slowly. Then you get perfect. Perfect wisdom, perfect compassion means you have really mastered it.
Well, it means you realize emptiness, right? Isn't perfect wisdom the same thing as realizing emptiness? But that's not what this is.
That also not perfect. For example, those bodhisattvas who are on the path of accumulation and path of preparation, they also realize emptiness. But they don't realize emptiness directly. It's like my seeing you through this rope. I can see you, because this is not very thick. I see you, but I can't see you so clearly.
But I thought when you realized emptiness, that was almost an absolute.
No.
Then
I'm telling you. So like when you see a person through a veil, like this, you see that person, but not so clearly. Which means you are seeing, meaning you have realized emptiness, but not directly. Directly means just like seeing your face without any covering. So when you for the first time realize emptiness directly, you already reach third path of seeing. Path of seeing is so called because for the first time you see emptiness directly, path of seeing. And before that, it doesn't mean before that you have not seen emptiness. Before that also you have realized emptiness, but with a medium.
at what point do you see things as they really are?
At one point,
At what point do you see?
as I mentioned already, when you achieve path of seeing,
Does this mean when you see with the veil or without the veil?
without the veil, then perfect.
I understand that part. I think the part I don't understand is being able to realize emptiness without actually seeing things as they really are. I thought the two things were always.
Yeah, seeing things as they really are means if you see things as they are but little bit covered, you are still, I think, seeing things as they are, but not so clear. Right?
Okay, if you say so. I just never heard this before. I thought when you realized emptiness, you have realized emptiness. You didn't.
No, you realize emptiness, that is fine. But I'm telling you, when you realize emptiness, it doesn't mean you realize emptiness directly, without any veil, without any obscuration. I'll give you the example. I can see you.
Yeah, but you don't walk around like that. You just walk around seeing. I mean, if you realize emptiness, why would you have a step of realizing it through a veil?
Huh?
What is the point of that?
What is the point of that?
What is the point of realizing
The-
emptiness but not clearly that?
The point is, there is no push button enlightenment. You start seeing things better and better, like wearing a new eyeglass or whatever, or probably like wearing a progressive lens, you know. Yours is progressive, this one is also, when you are traveling, progressive lens is very, very good. But this is for reading, right? So you see better and better. As you proceed, you see better and better. Compassion also, you may have some compassion, but it will become stronger and stronger. But still, one thing that I'm still not clear is your question. Perfection of wisdom, do you achieve it before you get enlightened? So perfection of wisdom, probably, I don't know, I have to find that out, to be honest. But normally we understand perfection of wisdom, perfection of all the practices, when you become Buddha, you know. But I also know that, for sure I know that you have realized emptiness directly when you achieve the path of seeing. So probably perfection means not just seeing emptiness directly, but together with many other qualities, maybe, I don't know. Let us not conclude anything. When we say wisdom gone beyond, see, even if you use the word wisdom gone beyond. Wisdom gone beyond means go beyond samsara. So when you see path of seeing, you're beyond samsara. You may not be Buddha, but you have gone beyond the samsara. Because then there is no fall back into the samsara. There is no sickness, there is no illness, there is no aging, there is no death when you achieve the third path of seeing.
What happens on the eighth home, right?
Huh?
What happens on the eighth?
No. Third path of seeing. So path of seeing means, in terms of the ground, maybe 8, maybe I don't know. Actually, you start moving to all these grounds only from path of seeing. From there, then first ground. The first ground, the joyous one, then stainless one, something like that. Yeah.
What is the difference between wisdom, prajna, that falls under sixth perfection, and the primordial wisdom?
Primordial wisdom, in Tibetan we call it yishi. Sometimes we use the word, precognition, something like that. So whether you call it wisdom perfection or primordial cognition, basically primordial means capacity that you have long before. Now you are able to discover it. That's it. Right? Primordial sometimes refer to consciousness, sometimes also to the Buddha, the primordial Buddha. That means from the beginningless time. Right?
That must be related to Janaya Avarana.
Yeah. Yeah. In earnest, the followers of Lhasa will basically seek to attain nirvana for the individual's own sake. According to the school, the mind should be trained to exercise a strong will in order to renounce. Also, we were discussing about that. It should pursue religious ethics and simultaneously practice concentration and special insight, so that delusions and the seeds of delusions may be purged and may not grow again. So, as I was mentioning, with the help of ethics and samadhi, you may be able to, lessen the delusions but you will not be able to purge it. And it is with the help of all of these three, especially wisdom, then you are able to remove the delusion, ignorance. And when you remove ignorance, then you achieve nirvana. You become arhat, we call it, the one, the fourth destroyer. Sometimes we use the word, English word, fourth destroyer. Four means here ignorance. Ignorance is our foe, our enemy. So that enemy is now destroyed. Fourth destroyer, ignorance. And the destruction is so nicely done that it will not grow again, meaning you will not be born into the samsara again, because you have removed the very root of samsara, ignorance. But still, you have not achieved Buddhahood. Still, you are not necessarily enlightened. Thus, nirvana is attained. So, this nirvana, which is not enlightenment, that nirvana is sometimes called solitary nirvana. Solitary nirvana. Nirvana just for oneself. The paths to be followed include the paths of preparation. So, these are the 5 paths. The paths to be followed include the paths of preparation. Path of preparation is so called because at that time there is a lot of accumulation of merit, lot of preparation of accumulation of merit. Path of application is so called because now you are making a kind of connection to the third path, path of seeing. Path of seeing is so called because for the first time you are able to see emptiness directly. Path of meditation is so called because even if you have seen path of seen emptiness directly, but still you need to make, you have to work hard to get very strongly habituated with it. You need to do it again and again. And then path of no more learning, which is when you become a Buddha, there's nothing more to learn, right? Mahayana. Mahayanists aim at attaining the higher state of nirvana, Buddhahood, which we call it as the non-abiding nirvana, for the sake not only of the individuals, but all other sentient beings. All other sentient beings. Who are the sentient beings? Are the trees sentient beings? No. No. No, I don't know. Sentient beings means those that possess consciousness. Whether the trees and plants possess consciousness or not is debatable. Some say they possess consciousness. And there is a lot of argument, They say, for example, there are some non-Buddhist schools, they say that trees possess consciousness because in the night the leaves withdraw, meaning they sleep. Withdraw and they sleep. Then others, they say trees move. There is a whole book about how the families of trees, when they are taken to other countries, among the families, if somebody takes one plant or just one tree to America and the rest could not go, then that one, because of sadness, die. If the whole group is taken together, they survive much better. So such experiments have been done. But generally speaking, Buddhist teachings, texts, they say trees don't have consciousness. They have no consciousness. But in the Buddhist teachings, they say there are some trees which act like as if they have consciousness because there are sentient beings living in the tree. So if you harm the tree, because there is a resident in the residence, so therefore if you harm the tree, then that person will also harm you. Especially you have to be very careful with some trees, which if you cut a little bit, they produce this red, blood-like liquid. Some trees, if you cut, they produce completely like white, milk-like. So those are, if you cut them, they are more harmful.
So if you cut rubber trees, or you cut maple trees for rubber or syrup, this is a big problem? You're committing some sort of unethical...
I don't know, but people say that those trees are more dangerous. If you cut them, there is more likelihood of you getting sick or things like that. So the reason probably may be not so much because the tree is a sentient being, but because in such kind of trees, different sentient beings, like maybe Nagas or others, live. That's one Buddhist explanation. Second Buddhist explanation is some sentient beings are like trees. Some sentient beings are like a plant. Some sentient beings are like flowers. So we think they are flower, but they are actually sentient being. So they have consciousness. So there are some sentient beings which really like different kind of sentient beings that you see in the sea, live in the ocean. Some are really like flower.
You mean like anemones or something?
Yeah.
Okay.
They really look like, some are really like trees, some are really like, flower. So there's so many different kinds are there. So many different kinds. And if you really watch carefully the different types of birds, some of them have like kind of umbrella on their head. When it rains, they spread it and protect themselves. So many types are there, unthinkable. Unthinkable. Right? For the sake not only of the individual but all other sentient beings, motivated by the thought of enlightenment, that is bodhicitta. Bodhicitta. Bodhi means enlightenment. Citta means mind. The mind to enlightenment is called bodhicitta. And the root of that bodhicitta is compassion. There is a stanza in Nagarjuna's, I think, Ratnavali, where he says, if you and others wish to achieve enlightenment, unsurpassing supreme enlightenment, the root is bodhicitta. And likewise, you should develop a all-encompassing compassion and the non-dualistic wisdom. So it mentions three, bodhicitta, which is rooted in compassion, and the non-dualistic wisdom. Right? They follow the same paths as those of Hinayana. But in addition to those paths, they practice other methods, upaya, skillful means, such as the 6 paramitas, transcendental virtues. So when we practice these 6 perfections, then these 6 that we are practicing, when we call it perfections, because this practice will lead to perfection in the end. Doesn't mean that you have already perfected in these 6 practices. Okay. Also, then.
So does this mean that the Hinayana path does not practice the 6 paramitas? Is that what that's saying? That's a practice of the Mahayana path?
Yes.
Oh.
See here?
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's here. But in addition to those paths, they practice other methods such as the 6 paramitas. So here I think that it doesn't mean they don't practice giving, they don't practice, morality. In fact, morality, as we discussed already, is one of the main practice of the Hinayanist, right? So perfection means one that leads to the achievement of Buddhahood, because they don't talk about achieving Buddhahood. They nirvana for themselves, perhaps. Right? By this practice, Mahayanists seek not only to rid themselves of delusion, but also of the defilement of negative deeds and their seeds. So delusions and their seeds, they include the obscuration to nirvana, right? And imprints. That is the cognitive obscuration, thereby working to attain Buddhahood. Now in the case of Hinayanists, they work to remove only the delusions at their seats to actualize nirvana, and not imprints. The 5 Mahayanis paths are likewise known as the paths of preparation, application, seeing, meditation, and normal learning. But although the names of the paths are the same as those of Hinayanis, there is a qualitative difference between them. And since Mahayanis have a different fundamental motive, so the motivation, that's what we are saying. As I mentioned, it doesn't mean that they don't practice giving and so forth, but the motivation. So therefore, even in terms of doing dharma practice, we say if your motivation is to get liberated from samsara and to achieve nirvana, then that becomes a real dharma practice. Without that wish to achieve nirvana, even if you practice giving and be a good person, that's good, but not necessarily lead to achievement of nirvana. So motivation makes a huge difference, right? And since Mahayanis have a different fundamental motive and in general follow different paths and practice different methods, the final goal which they achieve is different. The question is sometimes asked whether Hinayanists having achieved nirvana will be confined to the stage they have attained or whether they will subsequently follow the Mahayana. The answer is that they will certainly not regard their own stage of nirvana as the final goal, but will certainly adopt ways to attain Buddhahood. So it is said that when whether you call it Hinayanist or whoever, once they achieve nirvana, they just relax, so wonderful, there's no suffering, no problem. Then it said the other bodhisattvas will come and provoke them. Don't rest here. This is not the final resting place. There are so many other sentient beings are suffering. You have to go higher. So then they gradually also follow the Mahayana path. So therefore, ultimately there will be one yana, but 3 yanas, so 3 vehicles have been taught as a resting place when you are on the way. But the final, only one yana, that's Mahayana. Tantrayana. The paths I have mentioned are doctrinal paths, and they must be followed to provide a sound foundation before Tantrayana. Their way of yogic method is practiced. Practiced, what is practiced? C is missing, right? That's the advantage of wearing glass. Practiced. So Tantrayana, basically tan. Tan means, sometimes it refers to the body. Tan, man, dan. Tan means body, man means the mind, dan means wealth. It's a very popular phrase in India, tan, man, dan. Right? So tan means body. But here tan means continuity. Continuity. So the same word, tantra, can be replaced by another word, mantra. So tan is continuity, man is mind, tra means to protect. Protect. So tantra or mantra, whichever word you use, is a practice which will protect you. I mean, if you look at the meaning of the word. But of course, all practices protect you. But here, the way of practice, this is called the one that protects your mind, is normally our mind is unguarded, right? It goes into all different directions, and especially you are very good in highlighting the faults of others, and not so good in praising their qualities, right? So Tantra Yana, there is a special practice where you are encouraged to practice a pure attitude, where you try to see everything blameless, everything perfect, everything nice. So advantage of that practice is because of your pure view, nobody to blame. Everything is so good. When everything is so good, why should you get angry? Why you should develop jealousy, hatred, attachment, and so forth, right? So normally when we are not able to see that this person, this one, that you get attachment, anger, jealousy, and so forth. So by refining your attitude and outlook, you can protect yourself from many of these pitfalls, tantrayana or mantrayana. Loosely speaking, that's the meaning of the word tantrayana and mantrayana. So therefore, in the tantric practice, there are so many practices of, in Tibetan we call it Tangmang Jongwa. That means training your mind where you try to see everything in its pure form. Tangmang Jongwa. It's very, very important. It sometimes comes in the mind training practice also. Tangmang Jongwa, you see the good things, encourage each other, highlight the good things. That will protect you from many delusions. All right? In Tibet, the greatest care was taken before any tantric doctrine was introduced. Be careful. So, Tantra is called the shortcut path, the rocket path, shortcut path. And many people are tempted to follow the shortcut path, especially in today's world, where we want everything achieved through pushing the button, right? So everybody really expects push button enlightenment. Probably now they are thinking that they will achieve this through artificial intelligence, right? But the text says no, it will become a quick path only if you have the needed foundations built. And without having the needed foundations built, if you try to practice Tantra, try to overreach and practice Tantra, it may be suicidal in many cases. Because Tantric practice, you really try to use the subtle mind and subtle energy through yogic practices and so forth. So if you mishandle your channels, your energy, many times you might get mad, crazy. There are a number of people who, after certain practice, they become crazy. Right? So therefore, when you engage in any Buddhist practice, special Tantric practice, your mind should sometimes be a little bit tight, sometimes relax a little bit. Just like the strings of a guitar. You have to tighten it, but if you tighten it too much, it will break. If you let it loose, it will not produce the needed sound that you want to hear, right? So that's what he's saying. In Tibet, the greatest care was taken before any tantric doctrine was introduced. But because of this special restriction, calling it secret tantra, people made mistakes also. People made mistakes because in Tibet, great care, as the text says, great care was taken, meaning that normally people don't study Tantra until you have finished your Geshe, which means at least 20, 30 years studying the Sutric path, not the Tantra. And sometimes after you have completed the Sutric practice, you are ready to die. And some people in fact die before that, right? So His Holiness was on and off, he was suggesting that is a little bit mistake. And he explained by saying that even when we use the word cigarette mantras, use the word cigarette, it doesn't mean that you cannot, read it before having received initiation. You cannot teach it. Probably that's not the meaning. He said secrecy means what kind of tantric path you are practicing, that should be kept secret. In ancient Tibet, there are stories of some of the great Kadamba masters who mainly practice mind training. And people normally think, oh, they are not tantric practitioners. But they have been practicing Tantra so quietly that only after their death you will recover from their belongings, Vajra and Bell, which is used in Tantra. Not before that, you see. So not like today, everywhere, not like that. Right? Right? And I remember very well that many, many years back in Dharamsala we had, I think, 2-3 days dialogue with the Jewish scholars. And there was the Jewish group was represented by one very high, what they call it, Rabbi Zalman Shakhtar was his name, very, very senior. So we had 2-3 days discussion and dialogue. So there, through discussion dialogue, we found that in the Jewish tradition also they have something like the Tantra. And they kept it so secret, now nobody knows it. So His Holiness said, this is the problem of keeping it too secret and misunderstanding the meaning of secrecy. Right? And in the text itself, in the Guha Samaja text, I think Guha Samaja text, there is a line which says, Sangha Sangshi Chawa ne Chula Junyu Mahite. So when we call the secret Tantra a secret, not because the teaching has some fault to be hidden, not because there is a fault in the Dharma, fault in the teaching, but the person who is practicing, if it is not ready, it will harm that person instead of helping that person. Right? So there is the meaning. There's the meaning of Tantra. Spiritual teachers always investigated whether the doctrine was among those preached by Lord Buddha. Not only Tantra, even the mind training section, mind training teaching, is taught secretly before. First you need to practice Lamrim, stages of the path. Only after that the topics on mind training is taught. Otherwise mind training is also not taught openly earlier. Then gradually it became a public teaching. I think it was at the time of Geshe Chegawa who wrote this 7 points of mind training. I think around his time it became public, right? Spiritual teachers always investigated whether the doctrine was among those preached by Lord Buddha and submitted to logical analysis by competent pundits and tested its effects in the lights of experience before they confirmed its authenticity and adopted it. So that means they are very careful about what they are practicing. It's not like the modern world, you read every book and everything that is said in the book, you think this is the path to enlightenment or something like that. It's not the case. So says first they will see whether that teaching was among those preached by Lord Buddha. It may be not written by Buddha, but is it something that confirms or something that is true to the teaching of the Buddha? Then second, is it submitted to logical analysis by competent pundits? And second, it should be a text which has been analyzed properly through logical argument, right, by scholars. And thirdly, also tested its effects in the light of experience. See? Amazing, really. Before they confirmed its authenticity and adopted it. Now today, we run after any teaching, any teacher, just like a lump of dog thrown before a dog. Right? This was necessary as there were many non-Buddhist tantric doctrines which are apt to be confused with those of Buddhism because of superficial resemblances. And in fact, even in today's world, there are people who, once they see the great name and fame of Buddhism, they'll take a little bit here and there, and then they say this is Buddha's teaching, and then they interpolate something, that they made it up. And then also come up with a little bit different costumes to attack people, you see. I saw one who had a lot of followers in America, thousands of followers. He made up different costumes, almost like this one. Many beautiful pages like this, saying that this from this tradition, all the traditions they are with me, something like that. But later on I found he was actually a criminal, and who was in the wanted list in Taiwan. 3-4 of them I have seen. They have, in America and others, they have a lot of followers, but they were criminals, like that, you see. So people are, ordinary people are really like, if I use good word, they're innocent. If I use bad word, they're stupid. They run after everybody, really. So unless the teacher has some kind of knowledge and more importantly compassion to really help them, they'll mislead them. And especially this, some of this, I now don't remember the name. There's a documentary, I think made in America. I forgot the name really. Very interesting. Should really watch it actually. I now forgot the name. I watched it. A very intelligent Indian went there. Not Osho, no. Osho I know very well. I read so many of his books. Osho I know very well. Another one, I mean recent past. So he really wanted to actually teach people. So he acted as a teacher and started teaching. He was a very clever person. So many people followed him, you know. He was actually testing. And then he said, I was just testing, I'm not a teacher. People were crying. No, you should be our teacher. So that's the Tibetan saying, nguwe kaladena nguto, guwe kaladena guto. So we are like that. If you see somebody crying, we feel like crying. If we see somebody laughing, we feel like laughing. It's like that, you see. So it's important to really at least have some basic criteria and capacity to judge where to go. So that's why I always say Tibetans are really lucky. Tibetans are really lucky because of the spirit of Buddhism there. Majority of the Tibetans, do you think majority of Tibetans followed it with proper knowledge that Buddhism is really reasonable, good, you know? Did they scrutinize it? No, it's all blind faith. So I'm saying lucky because the religion towards which you had blind faith turned out to be a good one. Now imagine if it is a wrong one. I mean, so many places, so many things are happening. People are really like fooling each other, taking advantage of money. I also know this story of a group where that teacher was giving some teaching and say, after such and such practice, you will all go to heaven, things like that. So he basically make them drink certain poison and make them die. And people are so much after him, they are ready to drink it. Osho, something like that, but that other person, I don't remember. It actually happened, then the American secret police knew about all this, that on such and such day, this person is plotting to kill all of them.
Are you talking about Jim Jones?
Probably, yes, I think that name rings a bell, yes. Yeah, like that, you see. There's no shortage of like crazy people. And crazy we are, of course, we are all afflicted by negative emotions, so we can go.
But it's also very sad because in the West there's a plague of materialism, which is really a very big delusion, and it's the entire environment and the air you breathe. And people at heart are so hungry. They're so empty. They need what they don't have.
Exactly. That's why yesterday I recommended.
So easy prey.
Yesterday I recommended you to read this book, Why Buddhism is True, you know. There he gives a beautiful example, right in the beginning, he gives example of taking junk food, you know. If you take junk food, it's really bad for your health, but because the taste is good, whatever, you take it, And then he says, just if you take one time and then if you're completely satisfied, you will not take it again. But the thing is such that you take one, then you feel like taking another one. You get addicted to it. Similarly with the negative emotions, with attachment, with anger.
This came up at the science conference 3 years ago. Why aren't we addicted to positive emotions? Why are we more easily addicted to negative emotions? And there was never, this kind of a back and forth with no real, I don't recall a resolution of that question, but that's a really interesting question. Why shouldn't we be more addicted to positive emotions?
No, I told you yesterday. Day before yesterday or yesterday I explained this. Maybe yesterday. And I said, but there's, for me right now, the answer, best answer I found is what I already had explained.
Evolutionary.
Yes. Otherwise, yes, this question stands true, why. But if you say that, that really gives a good answer. Because we came into this world not to get enlightened. Not to, we may have the capacity. In Buddhism, we say you have the capacity. It doesn't mean you came to this world to get enlightened. You may have the capacity, right? You came to this world primarily for survival. And one of your main duties is to pass the gene to the next generation. So for that we need attachment, then hatred, anger, and so forth to protect yourself. that for me is a quite good answer. Alcoholism. Okay. This was necessary as there were many non-Buddhist tantric doctrines which are apt to be confused with those of Buddhism because of superficial resemblances. There are so many different, if you read the ancient Indian, some of the different practice that is done, there is the practice of committing suicide by jumping on the trident, believing that by jumping on the trident, if you kill yourself, you go to heaven. Even to this day, there are people who like pierce and also lash themselves until your body is covered with the blood, So I'm explaining this in general. I can't say this to those who are practicing. They will be so angry. They still think that there's a very good practice. That's one reason we highly praise Buddhism, because it is called the path is peaceful and fruit is peaceful. So traveling from peace to peace. Sometimes we use this phrase, traveling from peace to peace. Peace to peace. Not torturing yourself. And Buddha, that's why Buddha found the middle way. And he clearly said, you won't achieve enlightenment through self-mortification. And obviously you won't achieve enlightenment through leading a pampered, luxurious life. Amazing teaching, really. The Tantra falls into 4 classes, which are Kriya Tantra or Action Tantra, then Charya Tantra, something like Conduct Tantra, and then Yoga Tantra, and then finally Anuyoga Tantra, Anuttara Yoga Tantra. It was a vast number of treatises which cannot be enumerated here. There's so many classes, like we can also classify it into 3, the clear Tantra and the hidden Tantra, things like that. And then Father Tantra, Mother Tantra, so many different types. In the simplest terms, it is system, as already explained, bad karma are held responsible for the various kinds of miseries we suffer. The bad karma are created through delusion. Delusion is essentially due to an undisciplined mind. The mind should therefore be disciplined and controlled by exercises that stop the flow of evil thoughts. This flow may be stopped, and the wandering or projecting mind brought to rest by concentration on the physical makeup of one's body and the psychological makeup of one's body. So that's tantric practice, basically meditating on the energy and the chakras, in the body, one's body. When we say one's body, that's grosser body, subtle body, very subtle body. Mind also, gross mind, subtle mind, very subtle mind, right? And that mind rides on subtle energy, right? So therefore you focus on the energy. And their energy is sometimes explained as wind. So 10 types of different winds are taught. And our body basically moves because of these winds. If something, some disruption, little bit disruption happens in the flow of your wind, whole of your body will be disturbed. For example, you have seen some of people who are always wind, right? It's all wind. Then the fact you are able to swallow things because of wind. When you quickly eat something like this, all wind. And the wind can be controlled. Wind is disturbed because of many discursive thoughts. On and off, I was watching His Holiness meeting, endless people in Ladakh. And what kind of question they are asking, what His Holiness is saying. I found many people, many young people, in fact, are asking that I'm getting a lot of problem because of too much thinking. So what is the solution? Overthinking. So His Holiness said, think about those things where you can apply reason. Right? But then some other scholars, they also say, which I also support very strongly, people who have overthinking, they are not working at all, probably. So that's why we say empty mind is the devil's workshop, So sometimes it's really lead a simple life. Play football, piano, or cook food and go around. Then we will have no problem. Then take rest, do some meditation, thinking. Then like that, you see. Then also, as I mentioned earlier, the food you intake, makes huge difference, whether your wind is excited or controlled, Then our body also, like how you look after your body. When do you go to bed? When do you get up? The body actually really listens to you. For example, if you somehow, just before going to bed, if you took a strong coffee or something, which you're not used to do, probably you'll not get sleep. Or even if you get sleep, very short sleep, then maybe at 1 or 2 you wake up. Right? Then at 1 or 2 p.m. if you wake up, then don't wake up actually. That's my experience. If you wake up and then watch a movie and take another cup of coffee, do like this, it seems to be helping. But then you will have difficulty going back to sleep, and even if you go back to sleep, the next day you will wake up at the same time. So if you had this problem one time, then make sure, don't put on the light, just think about something. And for some people, the best way to make you sleep is read a book. Something like that. Make sure that you try to sleep. If you get habit, then next time you will be able to sleep properly. Right? Like that. So, okay, see you tomorrow.